Okay, so this is going to be an overview of rendering and with Arnold and Maya. It's following the creator workshop, what we did in the last two meetings. Let's power up Maya. Just a sec. Okay, so we have our model. This is the models that we created. Any model, we're going to try to create some basic lighting, render setup, some camera, an introduction to the pipeline to work and how to balance lights. Okay, so first we have our model that we made with the modeling tutorials. Any model here will fit. I created here a book box for a room. We're going to try to create this kind of window light. This is just a cube inverted and extruded from this side. You can add blinds if you want. It's not the point in your room. So we're going to start first with looking at what we're going to do with this scene. We're going to start with creating a new material, and we're using Arnold. So let's open the Hypershade. Make sure you have Arnold enabled. You can go to your Windows setting preferences, plugin manager, and load Arnold. If it's not loaded, and Arnold should be somewhere here, MTO. So this you should load up if you don't have the Arnold renderer. We're gonna first create a basic, and I'm not gonna get into materials so much yet. We're just gonna take the Arnold material from here. We're gonna use our uh, standard one, AI standard. And the only change we're going to do to the materials, we get a preview here. The only change we're going to try to make it completely diffused, and the reason for that is so we can see on a diffused material they shouldn't be so the highlights shouldn't go. They're always diffused. So like this, we can measure the maximum light or give us a start point for balancing the lights in the scene. So I'm going to put the diffuse weight into 100% and keep it like this. Not with the roughness. Okay, so that's the only thing we're going to do, and the next thing we're going to assign this material to everything in our scene. I'm going to select everything from the viewport. You can select it from the outliner and just either from the hypershade right click assign material to selection, or you can just stand here and right click. You should have assign existing material and it should show up here. The problem with this list, they get long, so maybe not the most comfortable way. You can also middle mouse, drag and drop the material. And that's all we're going to deal with the materials. We have a very diffuse materials, and the reason for that is so we can balance the light, so we can see when the light burns our scene. It should be completely white. Just make sure the material, yeah, it's white. Okay. So now that we have this, we're going to try first but just by clicking here for a render to see what we get. And we should get a black screen because there's no lights in the scene. But if I would look here on my render view on the alpha channel, I see that it does render. There's just no lights in the scene. So I'll put it back here to RGB, to the colors, or here to click for alpha. And close. Now I also need to set up a camera, and this we will go through this whole introduction, all the process, and create a few lights with Arnold, go a bit of an overview, but all those things will go a lot more in depth in later tutorials. This is just to get the basic workflow and to that we start having a nice render, a realistic render of this room setup with our models. I'm going to just start by creating lights, and I'm going to create a directional. Not even opening the settings. I should have it here in the scene. A directional light is imitating sunlight. It's a parallel light. I will scale it a little bit so we can see where it is. If I press 7 on my keyboard or click here, I would get the lights, how the light works. So this is a kind of preview to see the lighting. I will just rotate it. Now the directional light, it doesn't matter where it's at the scene because it's just a parallel light. It's a completely straight, so but I would move it just for visual to understand how the scene is lit to the side. Although it can stay in center or be small, it doesn't matter. Also its scaling is not important, physical scaling. So I'm moving it somewhere, maybe even closer. I want to get this kind of sunlight coming in from the window. Now also in the preview mode I can also set here to see shadows. and then I can see how the shadows are dropping. So I'm already getting a interesting enough result, and the idea here is to maybe tweak it a bit longer. Now we should look at it through our camera to get more exact. Just gonna maybe a little bit. I think this should be okay enough for what I want. Now this is a rough preview of this light, and now let's try to render it. Now, although I added a light, most likely we won't see much. Okay, we do a little bit. Now, since we're gonna have to create a camera to look inside the room, we don't care what's going on the outside, we are getting a bit of nice shadows, or the basic setup for the scene. With this light, the only thing that is relevant for us, if I'll increase the intensity and look up to test render, I don't need to render the whole shot again. I can just marquee select an area and click on render region. I increase the intensity, although most of our light controls are found in the Arnold, and that's what we care about. The rest here is not so important. Another thing, the directional light doesn't have a decay rate. Because it's a constant. I will open the Arnold tab, and that's the only thing that we're interested in. I will click on the use color temperature, and this basically imitates Kelvin temperature of the light. So 6500 is a kind of daylight feeling. We can take it down to 5500 like tungsten, change the lighting by this, but this is a good for us because it's a sunlight coming from the outside. Exposure will also control the intensity of the light, so maybe it is sometimes better to control it from here. Angle will work on shadows. We'll explain this later. Sample of this is the quality of the shadows. Samples you should always deal with in very small steps. I have the cast shadows, all those details for now, because this is an introduction. We are only caring about the color temperature, exposure to set up the light, and how the light is admitted. So this is so far with our first light here in the scene, and maybe I will increase it a bit more. Go this way, the number and the exposure a little bit up. I'll first do a test render, a small one. I can always use the IPR as well. Now the render does look noisy, which we don't mind. This is about increasing the sampling, which we'll deal with later. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to start with creating a camera, just so we have a view. I'm going to close the renderer, create cameras, just a basic camera. I see it here in my perspective. If I want to look through it, I will first maybe pull it out here where I can see it better. If I want to look through the camera, I go here, panels, perspective, camera 1, or I can do look through selected because I have it selected. And this is where I see it. Now, one important thing about the camera, if we open the attributes, Control A, I already had it open, we need to, just so we see how our camera looks like, we need to go to our display options, check the display resolution, so we see the resolution. Now we're 960/540. And I will also increase the overscan so I can see the full frame. I'll see exactly the framing of the thing. So the overscan just pushes it a bit back. I can also change the color of the gate and its transparency. So in case I want to have it all, let's say, black. But common settings are great. Okay, so since I'm looking through the camera, I will also adjust one more thing with the camera. And I will change the focal length to 50. And then just position it to kind of a quick and interesting composition. I am viewing the shadows. I will just disable them for a second. Also the lights. The idea is when I have my camera, I can really work on the lighting and know the angle. Let's say something like this. Maybe a little bit more from this side. Okay, this should be good enough for now. If I want to bookmark this camera so I can remember, so in case I move it by mistake when I'm jumping in between perspective, I can have here view bookmarks, edit bookmarks, and I'll call this one, I give it a name, so frame or composition 01. And when I click enter, it's in the shelf. So now the good thing about this is if I by mistake or whatever I change my camera view, I can go here view bookmarks comp 1 and I'm back to this view. Alternatively, you can keyframe your camera into this position. Okay, so another nice way that I like to work is to have two viewports. One will be on our perspective, which it is already. Another one will be on our camera viewport. Now in this case, you see the overscan is not enough, so I see the full frame. I'll press here 5 so I see it in shaded mode, and I will select the camera and I will change the overscan in our display to 1.5 even. I'll even take, okay, this should be enough to see it. I usually also like to tear off the attributes. Okay, so we have one light, directional light. We can see it in the preview lighting by pressing 7. How it works. Now I'm going to increase the light till I get to see when I'm hitting the highest. The highlights get burnt. Because I have a diffuse material, I will just now do again a render. Now the render settings here are on the default, the Arnold default. You can reset your setting if you get different results. It's very noisy, which we're not so concerned with now. So as I can see, I'm still okay. I think the lighting is quite balanced, but let's just try to increase it to see. So I can increase it either by the exposure. Let's just even take it further, or by the intensity. This is already burning it. Take it a little bit down. Because I have a diffuse material, I shouldn't get so burnt. But like this, relatively okay. For the starting point, I'm just balancing the light. Next point we're going to do is we're going to add another light to create this as if a light is bouncing back. We do get a bit of a halo here, but I'm going to just try to amplify that the light is coming back from the wall and bouncing back, so we get a bit of a backlight. For this, I'm going to create lights, and this time I'm going to create an area light. Now the area light, the nice thing, and when I work on two windows, I can, pressing F to frame it, I can see now the area light has a physical space, as you can see, and a shape. This line shows to which direction it's pointing, so we need to exactly reverse this. I'm going to turn it 180. I just turn randomly by hand, and I will just make sure the number in the channel box is 180. And then I will position it on the wall, just on it, and I'll try to kind of scale it to approximately the size of the light that comes from the window. I'm just trying to create a kind of a bit of a bounce light. Maybe scale it a little bit more up. Okay. Thing is, if I will do now a render, just give it a second. I don't see much difference. I don't actually know how much this light is interfering because I have the other light on and it's much more dominant. For the sake of balancing the light, and I think that it's a nice way to work, is just to take the first light and switch it off so we can see what this light does. And like this, it's much easier to work individually on each light and see what its contribution to our lighting scheme is. I will just now go into my outliner. And I will take the directional light. And in the attributes, I will take its intensity to 0. And I should already see the difference. I'll just render a certain area. So now I see without this light, so basically the area light that I put is giving us very little, if at all, any light. So what I will start doing now, alternatively we can also use the IPR, which will render on the fly, it's like a live view of our render changes. It is, if you have an older machine or a slower machine, it's not the best use. I will try. So for now, I can change the intensity here. I'm in the area light. I selected the area light in the outliner, and I can change the intensity here, which should do an effect. You can see I'm already seeing something, but I would prefer to, let's take this back to 1. And I will go into Arnold again. The main thing when we deal with lights is to deal with the Arnold tab. I'll use the light temperature, and I'm keeping it as the same, 6500. And the exposure, I'll increase the exposure in order to increase the light. So now I see it is starting to give me some kind of nicer, I'll do a combination. I push this to 5, I'll push this to 3. So now we see it lights here up on the floor. It's too much, it's exaggerated, and it gives me a bit of this light. So I can see this light is contributing. It is maybe a bit too strong, but just to illustrate this effect. So it lights up this. I will maybe take the exposure a little bit down. Okay. So now I will just go back to my outliner and select the directional light. And I will put back the intensity. I think it was, I do want to get a kind of glowy feel later on. Now this light that we put here, the area light, does give a contribution, but it's very, very slight. But that's kind of the basic with this. Now the overall light balance that we're doing here, we will have to tweak it once we have the textures and the materials done, but it's just to give us a starting point and to do all the lighting. Maybe even push this a bit more when I have a stronger. Okay, I will switch off the IPR. Okay. Gonna, just for the idea, I'm gonna duplicate this light, Control D, and I'm gonna move it sideways, so this is gonna mimic. I can press also 7 here, so I see the. Or I don't. So it's somewhere here, and I will lower it down as well. Maybe I can scale this light a bit down. Now I'm not gonna exactly check the lighting on this because it's just quick to overview, but we'll try another render. And I will move here to use default material so we can see the scene more clearly. Let's do another test render. So basically now we have 2 area lights bouncing from the window that hits the wall, which is a directional light. Okay, so we do get a bit of a glow from those two lights. Of course, in the real situation, we would have to get this more exact. Another problem I have now, I want to see a window. Usually when it lights, there will be some kind of glow around or a bit of light spill around the window. So what we're going to do now is duplicate yet the area light again. Control D. I'm going to bring it to where my window is. And I will also, I'm pressing spacebar to just have the whole viewport on perspective. And this is 90 degrees rotation. What I'm going to do now is put this light pointing over the window from the outside, and I will scale it to kind of wrap the whole window from the sides. I will also distort it a little bit, somewhere around there. Now this should be way too bright, of course, but let's try it anyways. I will load the last render, and I will just marquee this area. It's also nice to sometimes render half so you can see the difference between the two. I'll render this region, and look if this gave me much of a see, it's a little bit brighter, so it does influence. I could probably crank this up a little bit more. Alright, okay, for now let's keep it on this base. Another thing, outside the window we see, and now it's an alpha channel, I will create a plane. I'll scale it up. I will also flip it 90 degrees. So this here, later on I would put some picture of the sky or whatever in the render. For now I'm just going to block our window. So I'm looking all the time through the camera to see how it fits, because this is a still render, so we should always be efficient and work only on the camera view, not do other elements. So when I have this plane now, I have one big problem. It will probably affect the lighting. It will the shadows, and it might drop, so we need to take care of that. Before that, I will also assign it a material. And this time I'm not going to go with the materials from Arnold. I'm going to take the Maya surface shader, because I want just to have a color without any effect on the light. So I create a surface shader here in my create menu in the hypershade, and then I will take this and assign it to the plane. So I can either middle mouse drag and drop it there. And this should be in, or right click assign material to selection. Once I have this, I will open the attributes, or I can see them here in the hypershade, and I will change. Okay, and I will change the color into a kind of bluish white, maybe even exaggerated here. And this should give us this backdrop. Now, if I will render at this moment, the geometry itself will play as a part of the lighting. So this should hide some light, which is maybe not the results we want to get. Definitely not the results we want to get. So we have a surface shader. Just want to check it now. Now we have the right color. Okay, so I just put this color on it, and then in the attributes, again I select the geometry. In the attributes of the geometry, if I will go to render stats, and I will, here you have all the settings for rendering. So I will take out cast shadows because we don't want this plane to cast a shadow. It is there just to put a background or a picture. It doesn't need to receive shadows. Primary visibility we do need. The motion blur doesn't affect us here because we don't have any motion blur. We can take it off. Primary visibility means that it does render. If I take this off, it'll be here, but it'll never render. So we are putting this back in. Yeah, visible reflections, refractions are okay for us. So let's now try this render again. And I will try this. Okay, so we get to see this preview with our background here. Now I can still push the lighting a lot further because I'm not, maybe here I'm a little bit burning things, but I could still increase them. So overall we have one directional light from the outside, two area lights bouncing back from the walls to create a little bit of a glow, which of course needs to be a bit worked on and made it exact, and we have another one around the window which still needs to be increased. So this is kind of the basic layout to make a lighting. Now from the render settings, if we see all this grain, we'll just show very quickly how to increase the quality. So we open our render settings, we'll go in the Arnold renderer, and in the sampling we should increase this. If you take it to more production quality, you take it to 10. Let's increase these to 4. And we don't have surface scattering, we don't have refractions, we can also crank it up. That should be it. Ray depth is also something interesting for us in the quality. For now, I will leave it on the standard. That should eliminate, it'll take a lot longer to render, so be careful with this settings. You should only do this at the end and don't mind the noise. Learn to work with the noise, it'll save you a lot of time. Okay, so as you can see, this does really clear out most of the noise. Our lighting, if you see, it's a very quick setup, but I already see here around the phone that we might be burning it a bit too much because I'm losing details and this material is completely diffused. Again, it could be the results that I do want to get, that to have some highlights and burn, because at the end, after we'll put the materials and textures and work on the lighting, we do want to get this kind of a dreamy sun window light setup scene. But for now, we just actually, while we wait for this to render, or it already shows the smoothness. I'll do another render afterwards to clarify it. We still have a lot, if you see the shadows are very sharp, we have a way to treat that. All this we will get into. I just want to try now to maybe play with a bit last time with the balance of the light, and then I'll put a smoother render for this. So we'll shut this down. If we go into our area light, we use the same temperature. The only thing we adjusted was the exposure. We can still play on the sampling to increase the quality. We can also sometimes say some of those lights will just bounce some light and not drop any shadows. So this should be also a factor. Other than that, that's why the lighting is relatively simple. Now we do have another thing that we didn't treat. This directional light did not have a decay. All these lights, I can give them a decay rate. In this example, they're not decaying, they're just continuing forever by the intensity. Once I will put decay on them, and the decay rate is actually either controlled here, or once I enable this, there is a decay rate, and it's written here in the Arnold settings, so they are decayed a quadratic, which is the most realistic. A constant means it's all the time on the same, drops the same level. This is the same, the constant and linear are the same. When we are switched on, we're working with Arnold, we are using this is where it decides the decay rate, not this one. So we do have this enabled, but if for quicker renders I could switch this off and actually just give a halo here, no shadows, and just a decay for these area lights that bounce back. I will now just increase maybe this this lights a little bit. I am just a little bit increasing the intensity of all the area lights. and the rest I'm keeping the same. I will create a last light, and this time it'll be a point light, and I would just put it in the ceiling, so maybe it's best I will look through in perspective. I'm pressing F to frame it to see where it is. So this should imitate kind of a point light in the room. Now we don't want to put a lot of lights. I am already putting to show, but usually if you build a scene, you can have interesting lighting with a few lights. It's all about you can have objects bounce light back and things of that sort. Okay, point light is approximately where it should be. What I could do now is, again, how I should do it is to lower all the lights and just increase the intensity of this one to see how it affects the scene. I would also, in the case to save time, I will go back to my camera 1 and I will just deal with the Arnold again, use color temperature. I will increase here the to 4, and in the color temperature I'm going to change it to 5500. That should be a bit more tungsteny. 5000, yep, 5000. Okay, so we get a kind of more warm yellow light, a bit different than the rest. So it is, we get this window light, and I'm adding a little contribution of a point light as if a ceiling light to fill it in a bit the corners. I could also add some lights from the other, like a door here would have a light come in here to make it more interesting. This is of course to add, but here we're just trying to show the principle. And it could be not even a light, it could be just a shape that the light will drop through. And yep, this one I think is okay. Let's also increase the exposure. And I will do a quick test. I'm not testing it on its own. I'm going to do a quick test render. So I will load the last render and I will just render this region to see what it changed. Also, another way, a nice way of working is to save your images. You can save your images here and then compare the two with a slider, which we'll do next. I just have the settings now more smooth, so there is a contribution I can already see here. You also got this colored a bit. Yeah, it'll be enough for now. What I will do now is I will render the whole shot. Okay, so now let's just look a little bit at the render. So this is the basic render we did. Remember, we have just one material and everything, which is completely diffused. One thing to notice, if you see the shadows here under the table, or here, those are coming because of the area lights. Now, it would probably be best to actually disable shadows from those lights because we don't want to have a shadow dropping. We can, of course, the sampling is very low, that's why we get it noisy. It will become softer if we will add sampling. But the purpose of these lights, as you can see here, which is a good example that how they fill in back from the wall as if it's a highlight that comes in, and they illuminate areas around. So we're strengthening. This should illuminate around the chair a little bit. Suggestion is, and these are the things to play in by taste, is to switch off the shadows. It'll also render faster, or diffuse them. The other light, if you saw the point light we put here on top of the scene, that fills in a bit here. We don't want to have completely dark corners. And if we look at the highlights here where it's strongest, because we have a diffuse material, when we'll start putting real materials, we might have to tone a little bit the lights down. They might be already burnt. But this is what we're testing. We're trying to get a nice balance. Of course, this is a quick setup, but you should pay attention to set it up more correctly, and again, removing those shadows, adding other lights. Also, the light that we put here, you might not see it. There is a little bit of a definition here that we need to soften up, which is now. But this also, when materials and textures comes, this light setup will a bit change, but this is a great way to start. With one material, it works faster, work light by light, see its contribution to the scene, and then try to create a kind of more or less balanced scene with this. when we have this render done in the render view, we want to save it. So one way to do it is just to click on our save picture, and then I'm able to, if I had two of them, I'll be able to scroll and see exact differences, which is a nice way to compare renders. If I would like to save the image, I will just do File, Save Image, and either a colored manage or raw image, and I would save it. Just one important thing to note: if for some strange reason you rendered and you're not in the 1-to-1 ratio, so our zoom is 0.58. If I will save it now, it will save it in this ratio and it will look distorted. So you always have to either click here 1-to-1 to see the exact, if you want to save it in the exact resolution. So this is just to note in the full. Okay, so this is just quickly to show a quick build-up of lighting for the room. A bit of a setup of a camera and a material which is diffused. All those lighting materials and rendering we will continue into detail.